Good afternoon once again. This is Mr. Abdul Karim. I'm going to handle a checkpoint that is for grade 8. As you can see, that is from chapter 7, from where we stopped. So this chapter concerns actually Shakespeare. That is an introduction to Shakespeare. So I'll talk briefly about who Shakespeare is, historical background, the theater in Shakespeare's time. So I'll give a brief introduction who Shakespeare was, and I'll talk briefly about the historical background and then the theater in Shakespeare's time. So to start with, Shakespeare. Who is Shakespeare? Shakespeare is actually, his name is William Shakespeare. He was born on 23rd of April 1564 in Warwickshire town of Stratford upon Avon. He died on the same date and the same month of his birth, but in 1616, which says that he died on 23rd of April 1616. That is, he died at the age of 52 years old. He was married to Anne Hathaway. He had 3 children. That is very important. And he moved to London in 1590, where he started his plays. So we are going to focus on actually his plays. So I'll look at the historical background during this time. The age in which Shakespeare lived was one of the greatest, being one of the greatest known playwrights and author. Shakespeare came at a convenient time when Queen Elizabeth ensured stability after a period of civil war. So we know definitely when there's civil war in a country, the country becomes unstable. And it was at this time that Queen Elizabeth has just ensured the stability. So there were several changes during this period. That is, one of them, transition from Middle Age to modern time, invention of printing press, which made it actually easier for those who are able to read and write to read actually the plays of Shakespeare. Travel and communication improved a lot. So it simply means that people could travel from one country to another easily, which meant that they could actually attend some of the plays that Shakespeare was writing. And then booming of arts and literature. How was the theater in this particular time? Especially, we are putting in mind this is the time that the country has just come from political instability. So it means that a lot of things had to be changed. So the theater during this time was open air, which means it was done during daytime. And it was inexpensive because it was open air and was actually available for anyone who wanted to attend. And then it's worth noting that during this time, Queen Elizabeth was an admirer of the plays actually written by Shakespeare, and therefore she supported him in all ways. That is, we can as well say that the theater received support from important personalities, for example, from the members of Queen Elizabeth Court. And then we can also say that the theater at this time, it wasn't in the city, but rather it was built on the outskirts of the city. That is, as far as the theater in Shakespeare's time is concerned. So moving next is actually how the theater looked like. This is the picture. The picture you see in front of you is actually the theater. And then you can see it's made up of different different stages. We have the apron stage, we have the inner stage, and then we have the balcony stage. And as far as the audience is concerned, we have the audience who are seated, and then we have the groundlings. The groundlings, you can see most of them are actually standing, and they keep on walking in the theater. So I'll talk shortly about the 3 stages and the audience. So the apron stage, that is where the main action took place. The actors actually acted their play in this place. That is the stage that the actors used to play. And then the inner stage, it's actually behind. It's behind the apron stage. It is used for indoor scenes, and it is closed by curtains. That is, if an actor wants actually to change his costume, or maybe the actor is waiting for his turn, they normally wait at the inner stage before they come to the apron stage. And then we have another stage which is above the inner stage, that is the balcony stage. This one is actually used to represent the scenes on a castle's battlement. And then we can focus on actually the attires. You see the way the actors are actually the costumes that they use in their plays. So first and foremost, it's important to note that all parts were played by boys or men, as at that particular time the theater was not considered a suitable place for women to perform. So only boys or men were allowed to perform. That is one thing. And then the costumes, the kings were allowed. The kings, that is the actors, those who acted the part of the king, wore crowns. And then the swords featured in most plays. The sword you can see actually on the next page. Those two are people playing there. Those are two actors. They're actually fighting. So sword fight was actually common in most plays. And then when an actor is actually stabbed, animal blood was used to portray that this particular person has been injured. And then the audience. Let me talk briefly about the audience. Yeah, the audience, these are the people who actually come to watch the plays. The importance, some of the people actually who used to come to attend to these plays, one of them is the important members of aristocracy, then the members of respectable Elizabeth middle class, the merchants, the tradesmen, the city councillors, and the groundlings. The groundlings I've talked about it. We can see them. They are actually standing and moving around anyhow. To continue, we have Shakespeare's plays and their language. Shakespeare's plays and their language. So Shakespeare had a total of 37 plays. He had a total of 37 plays, which was successful. But as far as this part is concerned, I'm going to let you know that Shakespeare's plays were actually divided into 3 types. 1, histories, 2, comedies, and then 3, tragedies. So the histories, examples of histories, that is the Richard II, Henry V is actually, those are the plays that we can say they concern the history. And then we have the comedies. We have the Midsummer Night's Dream, the Twelfth Night, and then tragedy we have Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, and we also have Romeo and Juliet. And we'll look at that at the end of this lesson. Concerning the language which was used by Shakespeare, he wrote his plays in verse. You can see clearly he wrote his plays in verse, and it was referred to as blank verse, or in other words, iambic pentameters. Penta means 5. So what is the meaning of pentameter? Pentameter is a line in poetry that has 5 stressed syllables, i.e. the rhythm of poetry with 5 stressed syllables in line. Example is actually the 12th night, as you can see down there. An extract, there's a line which has been used from the 12th night. If music be the food of love, play on. So this can be actually broken into 5 different parts. You can see if meal, that is 1, zik be, that is 2, the food, that is 3, of love, that is 4, and then play on, that is 5. So the language that Shakespeare used was actually poetic, full of imagery, full of metaphors. And then he used a language that is we can actually talk about, he uses soliloquies. That is, a soliloquy is an act of speaking one's thought aloud when by oneself or regardless of any hearers, especially by character in a play. An example of a soliloquy is actually to be or not to be. That is the question. So this actually this actually found in Hamlet. This Hamlet saying that to be or not to be, that is the question. And then Macbeth, when he says, "Is this a dagger which I see before me?" And then we have third, "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" This is when Juliet was asking the whereabouts of Romeo. So she was speaking to herself. So this is known as a soliloquy. Next point of discussion is why Shakespeare is still relevant today. Why is it that people are still people are still watching his plays, reading his plays? It is simply because Shakespeare, the language in which he used, the force of his poetry, it's so touching that even anyone who happens to read one of his plays will actually enjoy it. So the force of poetry and his technical skills make his plays for all time. The wealth and variety of the true-to-life characters. He actually addressed problems that are facing the current society. So it is something which can be used for generations and generations. And then the universality of the themes in his plays. The themes in his plays, they are current themes. So it means anyone can read any of his plays. So he is still relevant today and even tomorrow. The unique experience in watching his plays. All these factors make his plays to be appreciated without limits. So no one will get tired of watching Shakespeare's play because of actually what the language in which he used in his plays. To mark the end of this section, that is an introduction to Shakespeare, we look at one of his plays, that is Romeo and Juliet. I'll talk briefly about it. It's just an extract, it's not a full version. I believe it's Act 1. That is, you'll find it on page 104, to 107, Romeo and Juliet. The play is there. If you go to page 104 to 107, you can read slowly and at your own pace, after which we'll look at the questions on exercise 1 on page 107. So to talk briefly about this book, Romeo and Juliet, it was set in Verona, Italy. It's about two leading families, the Montagues and the Capulets. And you'll realize that the two families, the Montagues and the Capulets, were involved in unending disputes for generations and generations. And then we talk about the subject, the theme of Romeo and Juliet is love. The genre is tragedy. Setting, we've actually talked about it. It's in Italy. So to talk briefly about it, it's an age-old vendetta between two powerful families who were wrapped into bloodshed. A group of masked Montagues risk further conflict by gate-crashing a Capulet's party. A young love-sick Romeo Montague falls in love instantly with Juliet Capulet, who is due to marry her father's choice, the County Paris. With the help of Juliet's nurse, the women arrange for the couple to marry the next day, but Romeo's attempts to halt a street fight leads to the death of Juliet's own cousin Tybalt, for which Romeo is banished. In a desperate attempt to be reunited with Romeo, Juliet follows the friar's plot and fakes her own death. The message fails to reach Romeo, and believing Juliet's dead, he takes his life in her tomb. Juliet wakes to find Romeo's corpse beside her and kills herself. The grieving family agree to end their feud. So that is, in short, the story of Romeo and Juliet. You can see it ended actually with the death of Juliet and Romeo, even though Juliet faked her death, but Romeo thought that it is indeed true that Juliet is no more. Therefore, he decides to kill himself beside her tomb, only for Juliet to wake up then to find the corpse of Romeo beside her. She in turn kills herself. So this marked the end of the dispute between the two families, the Montagues and the Capulet. So we look at the question that is question exercise 1, page 107. The question, you look at the first question, says, look at Romeo's first speech beginning. Oh, she doth teach the torches, and explain how the families and how the similes and metaphor he uses convey impression of Juliet's beauty. So in this particular question, we are simply going to concentrate on Juliet's beauty and how it was conveyed by Romeo. How it was conveyed by Romeo by looking at what he actually said in the first speech. So you can see clearly here. Hope you can read my handwriting. Romeo believes that Juliet was so beautiful that she made the torches around the hall appear to grow dim. She was a dazzling jewel illuminating the dark night sky. She stood out from other girls like a snowy dove in a field of crows. So that is actually how Romeo perceived the beauty of Juliet. And that is how we can actually, that is actually what I noticed in what Romeo said in his first speech. So going to the second question, imagine this scene in performance. How does Tybalt's reaction to Romeo's presence to the tension in the scene? So of course you know that Tybalt is a cousin to Juliet, and Tybalt did not like Romeo being a member of the opposing family, and therefore each time he saw actually Romeo, he got angry. Therefore, we are going to focus on the character of Tybalt, okay? Because they've said, how does Tybalt's reaction to Romeo's presence add to the tension of the scene, the tension in the scene? So, it shows how Tybalt infuriated. He was infuriated over Romeo's presence at the Capulets' hall. Tybalt couldn't hide his anger, and the scene foreshadows his eventual fight with Romeo. So, he's one person who was very angry. He was controlled by the temper, and he was ready to fight at any given time. Question 3. Explain as fully as you can the difference in the behavior of Tybalt and old Capulet. Why do you think that Capulet behaves as he does? You should refer to the text in your answer. So, when you compare the two characters, Tybalt and Capulet, you'll realize that Tybalt's character is different from old Capulet. Tybalt is temperamental, while old Capulet is commanding. Old Capulet is commanding, at the same time he is accepting. So you can see actually question 3 here says Tybalt is argumentative, strong-willed, passionate, and loyal. He fuels the conflict between the two families. So I'm saying that Tybalt is strong-willed because he said, to strike him dead, I hold it not a sin. So he's one person who was courageous enough to say such kind, to utter such kinds of words. And then you can also say he's loyal when he was actually talking to the uncle, that is old Capulet. Why uncle? Tis a shame. So he didn't want actually his family to be involved in such a situation. And then you can say he's argumentative when he actually refers to his uncle. Uncle, this is a Montague or four. So you can see already the way he's actually questioning is argumentative. He's asking a lot of questions. And then you can see old Capulet, on the other hand, is sympathetic. We can say he's accepting, or we can say he's a protective father when he tells Tybalt, content thee, be happy yourself. Gentle cause, let him alone. So is one person, old Capulet did not want people actually to fight. You can see that old Capulet was one person who preferred actually people to live peacefully. And if he could stop any battle, he's one person who actually would go ahead and take that step. Question 4. When he first speaks to Juliet, Romeo asks if he may kiss her. Explain the metaphor in the first 4 lines of his speech. So if you go back to actually what Romeo told Juliet, okay, you'll realize that they've used a lot of metaphors. Okay, they've used a lot of metaphors, and therefore I come up with this conclusion that Romeo makes a comparison or a metaphor of Juliet to a holy shrine, his pilgrim lips. Pilgrims are typically religious travelers who go long distances to visit a place of religious importance. So here they're trying to compare two things that are not the same. So that is a metaphor, according to me. We go to question 5 that says, how does Juliet respond? So initially, Juliet actually refused. She refused actually to accept Romeo's offer. And you can see question 5. At the very beginning, Juliet refuses Romeo's offer of a kiss, but later on submits to his request by asking for his sin. So she refused in the first place, but afterwards she accepted. So we look at question 6. Look closely at the dialogue between Romeo and Juliet. From if I profane to my prayers effect I take. What do you notice about the form of these lines, and what effect does this create? If you go back again, if you go back to the story, to actually the dialogue, you'll realize that a lot of literary devices have been used, but I'll be more focused on rhymed verse. So question 6, these lines convey a wide range of literary devices. Rhymed verse is an example, and I've given you examples that have been used in the line, that is hand and stand, these and kiss, match and touch, to and do, prayer and despair, sake and take. The use of rhyme, what effect does it have? So the use of rhyme makes it easier for the reader to recall the lines. It makes a poem sound more musical. That is actually the use of the rhymed verse in the play. Question 7. What impression do you have of Juliet's nurse from what she says and does in the scene? So here we are going to focus on Juliet's nurse. Exactly, we are going to focus on what she says and what impression. How do we feel about it? So you'll realize that Juliet's nurse, this is actually question 7. She plays a secondary mother figure for Juliet. The nurse enjoys a closer relationship with Juliet. She is one of the few characters in the play who explicitly wish for Juliet's happiness. She is emotionally supportive. She is talkative as well. That is as far as the nurse is concerned. And going to question 8, Juliet asks the nurse, what is yon gentleman? Why do you think nurse does not immediately refer to Romeo in her reply? Why is it that she didn't refer to Romeo even though she knew that Juliet was asking about Romeo? So it is simply because Juliet doesn't know Romeo's name and she wanted to keep his identity. The nurse actually wanted to keep his identity a secret, bearing in mind that the Montagues and the Capulets were actually not friends. Therefore, she didn't want to create that kind of atmosphere that is going to create hatred at that particular instance. Then question number 9. Explain in your own words Juliet's 4 lines at the end of the scene, beginning, my only love sprang from my only hate. So you can see already here, we have antonym of love and hate. And then Juliet who says, my only love sprang, that is, my only love came from my only hate. So my only love actually came from the people that I'm supposed to hate. So in other words, I can say, question 9. This is actually how it's supposed to be. Juliet is in love with someone who comes from a family she is supposed to hate. This is a paradox or a contradiction. So you can see clearly that actually Romeo is from the Montague while Juliet is from the Capulet, and the two families hate each other and they fell in love with each other. So my only love sprang from my only hate. So I'm in love with someone actually who is supposed to be my enemy. That is the contradiction or the paradox in that statement. And then finally, the last question: by referring to what people say and do throughout the scene, explain fully what you've learned about the society of Verona, the feud between the two families, and your thoughts about the relationship between Romeo and Juliet. So this question, the answer is supposed to be similar to this. That is, Verona is where the tragedy Romeo and Juliet takes place. The city is run by nobles, the Montagues and the Capulets. This places them in direct opposition with the society of which they are part of. It shows how prominent families were important in life in Verona. Both Romeo and Juliet came from prominent families, so they were recognized as either a Montague or a Capulet. Everywhere they went, not as their individual selves. The relationship between Romeo and Juliet can be largely defined as passionate. That marks at the end of the lesson for today. Thank you for listening.